And then they've partnered with a swing coach to then change the technique of his swing in order to get the most out of his mobility with the swing that he has. So that's why, like, if you were to put 40 swing coaches in a room together and said, come up with one golf swing. I just want one golf swing across the board. Looks exactly the same. Everyone come up with their own, and we're going to make it the same. That would never happen. And that's why you turn on the TV, you got all these different golf swings, right? They all look a little different. And that's because each body is different. Each body moves a little differently. So my job is to get the most mobility out of that segment and then work with whatever golf coach I can in order to change maybe a technique or equipment or whatever it may be to make it so that they can perform at their best with what they have.
All right. So this is episode 45. Shocked that I've made it this many episodes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was this, like I said, I told you before, this started as just a way to make content. And because I felt like early on, when you make content, it's so awkward. It still is super awkward, but I ended up feeling really robotic, you know?
Yep.
And then I thought, well, having a candid conversation, you can kind of forget about that. And at some point, you'll kind of sink into the conversation. And it'd be nice to get some of those more off the cuff, I don't know, thought-provoking comments rather than scripted material.
Yeah.
So that was the whole idea for initially to do this, was just a source of content. And now it's at the point where we looked at it, the stats. If I make it to 50 episodes, it's like 10% of podcasts make it to 50.
Wow. And you're at 42, is that what you said?
This is 45.
45, okay.
So we'll definitely hit 50 by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's become something that's actually just kind of enjoyable, because I think for me, it highlights a lot of my weaknesses. I'm just not a conversationalist.
Mm-hmm.
So the process of recording, having conversations, editing, and doing all these things it's cringeworthy, because I have to watch everything and listen to everything over and over again, but it has made me a better communicator, and it's super fun. And now I'm kind of at the point where, I'm trying to look for sponsors.
Right, yeah.
Because for the past 2 years, this has done nothing but lose money. So my goal for 2026, if anyone's listening and you want to sponsor this podcast, is I would like to break even in 2026. I think that would be fun. So thank you for giving me your time today. I know it's not ideal on a Sunday to be recording a podcast.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is an awesome setup here, and I'm looking forward to it.
I'm excited because this is the first interview I've done not the first interview I've done in CrossFit, because we use the break room, but the first one I've done in the gym itself. I've recorded a bunch of videos in here, and I really like it. I think it's just they have it set up really well, and it's a really neat backdrop.
Yeah. So
I'm looking forward to, if this one turns out pretty well, the sound and the video, I'd like to do more in here. But yeah, so 45th episode, first episode in the actual gym. And I work out of this gym, so I'm in here all the time. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, this is great. This will be fun.
Well, I wanted to talk to you. So you are a chiropractor, but you practice in a way that I think people would find unusual. It's not, when you say the word chiropractor, there's certain vision that comes to people's mind. It's almost at the point where when people ask me what I do, I don't want to be deceptive, but also I don't practice like what people would think a regular, like a stereotypical chiropractor would practice. So I feel like the name in a way creates a misconception and kind of holds me back a little bit. You practice even more, I think, unique than I do, because you access a lot of technology that I don't think people would associate with chiropractic. So I'm curious, you use a very specific system that I think initially you got into for golf sports performance, but has branched out into other sports.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So I was a football kicker in college, and 2 days before my senior year, I tore my groin, tore one of the muscles right off the bone, and just kind of going through the whole health process protocol, seeing different doctors, and kind of getting to the reason why this happened. What are the next steps? Met with a specialist at the University of Michigan. He was a really, really good doctor, hip specialist. And he had said that based off of my x-ray images, and then he put me through a little bit of a movement screen, he said that my hip external rotation was pretty restricted, which I had never even known that. I never had it measured, never had it tested. And so he said just over time, that groin of my kicking leg was building up more and more tension until finally one day when I was kicking, we were doing kickoff in practice, I tore it. And just going through that whole process made me kind of realize, man, like if I would have known about this external rotation limitation of mine, if I could have done things to prevent it, maybe I would have never had this injury. So flash forward to I go to chiropractic school down in Florida, and this was probably like I think the first or second. We were in quarters, a quarter system down there. And I think it was the first or second quarter system. One of the teachers knew I was into sports, and he said, "Hey, there's a guy coming to speak. He is into golf biomechanics." The teacher didn't know a ton about him at the time, but he said, "It's $10 for students. You should go listen to him." So I said, "Okay, sounds good." So went to hit this guy's talk. His name was Greg Rose. So for the people that are in biomechanics, he's in charge of the Titleist Performance Institute out in California, and he specializes in golf biomechanics, figuring out why a golfer may have pain, where they would need to find more power in their golf swing, a bunch of different things. Golf fitness, works with junior golfers all across the board. And he does this system where TPI, where you start with a movement screen where you assess the muscles and joints of the body. And then you go into a power screen where you assess basic strength. And then you finish by, he hooks you up to, and his system in California is really advanced. But he's got this whole performance lab, and he hooks you up to these sensors, and he analyzes how you move in the golf swing and if you move efficiently. And I was super interested in all that. And so I kind of wanted to use that as my special niche with my practice. I knew I always wanted a special niche. And I love sports. I love working with athletes and active people. We're in a CrossFit gym. I love working with people like that as well. And I just thought, man, if there's a lot of athletes out there, whether it's a baseball pitcher, I work with them a lot, volleyball, quarterbacks, if they're dealing with pain, maybe I can figure out what's the root cause in their motion and their mechanics and just overall strength and mobility that's causing this pain. So yeah, I go through that same process. My system's a little different than what they use at TPI. I have these sensors, and I can go mobile. So I can go to a golf course, I can go to a football field, I can go to a volleyball court, and it hooks up with either my laptop or iPad. And I measure their biomechanics. So if, say, I have you swinging a golf club, I can break down what's your shoulder plane like, what's your hip plane like, how much hip rotation, how much torso rotation you have, where you may be restricted, and then you kind of puzzle it all together and come up with an end goal of where you need to get the athlete to be.
So it's more geared towards pain management,
Yeah,
or sport performance.
both. So you can, if you have pain, you can come to me, and if you feel like so like for example, I was working with a quarterback where he had two goals. One, he had some shoulder pain when he came to see me. And then he also said he wanted some more distance on his deep ball. And I have had golfers with this too, where they come in and they say, my driver only goes 250. I want to get 275, 280. So I can break down, and they didn't have any pain at all. And so I can break down and figure out the core side of it is when you swing a golf club, when you throw a football, when you throw a baseball, all the energy that you create starts in the ground, right? It goes up through to your hips, to your torso. Say, I always like using baseball pitcher because a lot of people can relate to that, through your shoulder and releases at the hand. Okay. And the very base of it is your body is made up of mobile and stable joints all the way up through that motion. Your ankle is the first joint, and that's mobile because it can move 360 degrees all the way around. The next joint is the knee, and they classify that as stable in relation to this because it can only flex and extend, right? It can't, if you laterally bend it, that's where you get issues. The next joint is your hip, and that's mobile because same thing as the ankle. You can move it all the way around 360 degrees. The next joint is the low back, and the low back isn't designed to rotate, so that's stable. The torso, thoracic spine, is mobile because it's designed to move in all planes. Lower cervicals is stable. You kind of get the pattern here. Shoulder is mobile, elbow stable, wrist mobile. So the pattern is mobile, stable, mobile, stable, mobile, stable, all the way through your motion. So what I do with the movement screen, which is step one, is I assess each of those joints' mobility. And if you're restricted in those, so really common example is if you have poor hip mobility or restricted hip mobility, usually in a rotational sport, the next segment, if your hip is restricted, the next segment would then have to do a lot of the moving. So if I have poor rotation in my hips, right, the only way to then swing a golf club or throw a baseball or wherever it might be is I have to transfer that energy that is restricted to the hips to the next joint. So the next joint would be the low back. Well, the low back's not designed to rotate. So that's when people come to you with golf low back pain and they go, yeah, man, my low back's killing me. Okay, let's put you through this movement screen. Let's see if it's the hips. Same thing. Sometimes it could just be ankle immobility. And all that energy starts from the ground and you have no ankle mobility. So then the next joints above are the ones that are affected. So once I go through that, I puzzle that together with a basic power screen is what I call it. And power in sports is split into two different segments. So in order to get more power, it's power equals strength times speed. Okay. So if someone has, I put them through a simple strength test. First with the power screening, sorry, backtrack here. First with the power screening, there's set numbers and set weights that have been taken as like an average, especially for golf on the PGA Tour. So you can connect those numbers based off of those averages. So for males, for example, I take an 8-pound medicine ball and I assess their core and upper body power, and then either standing broad jump or vertical jump to assess their lower body power. So it's just lower body, core, upper body. And for the lower body power test, the average on the PGA bare minimum is 18-inch vertical jump, or you should be able to clear 120% of your height in a broad jump. The range is about 18 to 22 though for the vertical jump. For your core range, I have them lay down on their back. They take a 8-pound medicine ball. It's 8 pounds for men, 4 pounds for women. And I have them sit up and throw. I have a huge tape measure that stretches out, and they should be able to throw that medicine ball 18 to 22 inches. The last one is just a seated chest pass with the medicine ball, and that's measuring upper body power. And same thing with that, they should be able to throw that 18 to 22 inches. So once I'm done with that, I assess, okay, say your upper body was 15 inches when you threw the medicine ball. Now I know, okay, you have a power issue at your upper body, but that you passed your lower body and core test, your lower body and core power is good. Now I need to break down your body. So that's where we get into that power equals strength times speed. I need to figure out, is your lack of power a strength problem or is it a speed problem? And what I mean by speed is rotation speed. Okay, because for this is all rotational sports. First thing you always test is strength. So for the strength test, again, sorry, I'm going down the whole rabbit hole here, but for the strength test, I set them up in my office on like a cable machine, and it's just a cable push test. And if they reach 30% of their body weight with a single arm cable push by 8 reps, then I classify that as a pass. That means they have the amount of strength in the upper body to pass the strength test. So from there, now I know it's a speed problem. And that's where I hook you up to the sensors. And whether it's you have shoulder pain or upper body pain, I know, okay, this can likely be from your strength is good, but your strength is overpowering your speed, or vice versa. If your strength isn't good, then maybe your speed is overpowering your strength. And that could be why you have your baseball pitcher shoulder problem or whatever it may be. So to answer your question in a really long phrase there, both. If you want to just come in and enhance performance, I can do that as well. And if you come in with pain of any kind, then we can address kind of the root cause of why you have that.
How do you deal with if you have a joint that you would classify as mobile, but it has to be stable? So there's a deformity, or maybe they've had a surgery, joint replacement, things like that. So then you've basically got 3 stable joints lined up.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you like for golfers, it's big with fusion of the spine, right? If there's a fused segment of the spine, that's big. And that obviously will restrict mobility. So, or same thing with a hip surgery or whatever it may be. So that's where what I really love about doing this is I partner with a swing coach or with a pitching coach, and all my work is in together with them. So the one example I like using is Rory McIlroy and Brooks Koepka on the PGA Tour. They both hit it a mile. I mean, Rory hits it a ton, and same with Brooks. I mean, some of their drives are 330, 340. They're both very different in size, right? Brooks is a really big guy. Rory's strong, but not nearly as strong as Brooks. If you break down their biomechanics, Rory's hip mobility and just overall mobility of his joints, especially during the golf swing, is almost double what Brooks Koepka's is. So instead of telling Brooks as he's growing up, hey, we need to increase mobility here, they've maxed out where they think his mobility should be. And then they've partnered with a swing coach to then change the technique of his swing in order to get the most out of his mobility with the swing that he has. So that's why, like, if you were to put 40 swing coaches in a room together and said, come up with one golf swing. I just want one golf swing across the board. Looks exactly the same. Everyone come up with their own, and we're going to make it the same. That would never happen. And that's why, like, you turn on the TV, you got all these different golf swings, right? They all look a little different. And that's because each body is different. Each body moves a little differently. So my job is to get the most mobility out of that segment and then work with whatever golf coach I can in order to change maybe a technique or equipment or whatever it may be to make it so that they can perform at their best with what they have.
You're not necessarily trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Yep. No, because everyone's different, right? It's the same with lifting, right? If you tell someone to squat and they can only go to 90 degrees and the person next to them can go well below 90 degrees, and the person's hip mobility that can only go at 90, that's as far as they're going, you're not going to say, nope, you have to go lower. First, you're going to assess, can he go lower? And if not, then you make some adaptations to that lift, right?
Yeah. I have selection bias in clinic because I only see injured athletes, and I have a observation from working with injured athletes is that most of them are extreme specialists, and they have huge gaping holes in what I would consider to be like general physical preparedness. So you may have like a female volleyball player with shoulder pain who can't do a push up, not because the push up's painful, legitimately does not have the strength to push body weight 1 rep. I've had sprinters who don't back squat or don't really squat heavy at all, not because they don't think it's useful, but at some point it caused pain and they've just, been putting a band-aid on it for years, and they've reached a relatively high level of sport but super weak. And you look at the mobility and flexibility in the squat, and it's just bad. And if someone's coming in like a sprinter with hip pain or knee pain coming out of the blocks, and they're not robust enough to handle a 1 body weight squat at full depth, that's going to create too much pain for them. I look at that as a problem. That may not be a sports specific process. It's just, hey, you're missing some basic function. And I wonder, so looking at this type of thing, like maybe you get someone who's got a lot of GPP, like in general, they're fit, they're healthy, they're a high level performer, and you're fine tuning, or they've got pain that's come out of nowhere, and you're kind of like, well, we really have to get nitty gritty with this to pick out where this is coming from. But then you've got these other weekend warrior type athletes that, or even top level athletes that can't do certain things, that they're so tight they can't even touch their toes, or there's some basic things that bother them. Do you ever find when someone comes in and they want this high level screening, and you're thinking, well, we could do that, but we've got to step way back, because maybe even in the strength testing you're thinking, well, we got to get close to 8 reps, and they struggle with 1. And then does it ever become, well, before we go down this rabbit hole of refining, we've got to set some foundations here? How does that work with TPI? Does it expose that quicker to you and then allows you to say, hey, pause, let's step over here and look at some basics and then come back? Or is it something that it addresses and within the system? Like, is the system that variable?
Yeah. So yeah, good question. Um, so as far as when you get down, if someone comes in, and I can obviously tell strength is the issue. Before you assess anything else, I always start with strength. So that's the baseline of the pyramid. Usually I still go through the full system just so that I can gather all the data of how they came in as themselves that day.
Yeah.
Um, so once we get into I'll transfer just real quick into the sensors. When we get into the sensors, what it reads, I attach a sensor to the hips, to the torso, to the shoulder, and to the wrist. And it's called the kinematic sequence. And it's a chart that comes up on my computer or iPad once someone does a movement. And it shows your body is designed to rotate in order of what I just said: the hips, torso, shoulder, hand. And the sequence tells me, okay, are their hips firing first? Is their torso firing second? Is their shoulder firing third? Is their wrist firing fourth? In that order. Because as you generate energy from the ground, you have to do that in order for the energy to transfer to the club, to the ball when you throw. So usually I go through, back to your question. Usually I go through the whole segment first, but yeah, within the TPI screen, the one for baseball is called On Base U. There's certain areas where this is more of a red flag. We need to address this right away, versus, yeah, you need to improve strength, but let's focus on your technique of how you swing and stuff first. Does that make sense? Or your hip mobility is really bad, but everything else is really good. So we're just going to swing for right now and address your swing and your mobility at the same time. Now it breaks it down to, it depends on what the issue is. If it's a speed issue, over a strength issue, then you can sort of get into, we can do your motion and improve speed, because the only way to speed is by doing that motion or doing motions similar to it to increase the fast twitch muscle fibers in your body to train your brain. I need more speed. But yeah, as a whole, to your question, there are parts of the screening and parts of the power screening and parts of the sensors where if you see this, or if this is restricted, or if this is weak, this is a red flag. Needs to be addressed first. We're going to take them to the side, say, before we do anything else, if you keep swinging like this with this problem, you will have issues. And we need to address this now before, like for my case, right? I waited, never knew about the external rotation problem with my hip and ended up tearing my groin. Never had any issues, never had any groin problems growing up. And
Yeah. I think that's a hard thing probably to discuss because it might expose some people who miss some stuff along the way. Because looking at some of these more mobile joints, when someone's missing rotation of the hip, a simple orthopedic screen, it's pretty obvious.
Right.
You know, if you do a decent orthopedic exam and you look at both hips,
Yep.
and then they can't move it, and then you go and you put some pressure into it and it doesn't move very well, it's quite, I think, if you're trying to fine tune it, you know, within a really tight margin, and maybe that would be really valuable for people who are competing at a really high level. But when you have a glaring rotation deficit, you know, I wonder how much do you see when someone comes in and you just watch them move and you go, because you can see it when people walk, you can see when people move, if they swing a club, you can probably tell this, when you make those just visual observations or observations from an exam, does it match up within what the system says, or is the system showing you things that you're not seeing?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest issue with that, and honestly, I've had a lot of people come in with this, is like someone will come in with shoulder pain, right? Or elbow pain, like a baseball pitcher, quarterback is another prime example. And I'll say to them, you know, what kind of treatment did you receive in the past with your shoulder pain, with your elbow pain, whatever the pain may be? And we'll take shoulder here, for example. And they'll say, well, they did some cupping on that shoulder. We did some shoulder exercises to improve range of motion. And they just focus on the shoulder, right? Because that's the area of pain. So then I'll put them through this whole movement screen. I'll put them through the power screen and the sensors, and I'll puzzle it all together. And I'll come to find out, yeah, now their shoulder, I don't know what their shoulder mobility was before they saw me, before they went to the other professional, whoever it was. But their shoulder mobility is actually really good right now, but they still have shoulder pain. So then that's where I go, which is what I love about this. I get to look at the whole body and go, you know what? We'll just go back to the hips because it's an easier example to understand. Your hip mobility is really bad. Has anybody ever looked at your hips? Well, no. Why do they do that? I've never had hip pain. And that's where I explain to them, yeah, so I get that. But when you're playing sports, when you're throwing, all that, what I was saying earlier, that energy that transfers through the hips, your hip mobility is so bad, it's all stopping at the hips. So what's the only way from there that you can throw a ball? If all the energy you create from the ground stops, you've got to use motion from your shoulder. So what I always like saying is let the big muscles do their job and let the little muscles do their job. Well, if all of a sudden the little muscles, smaller muscles of the shoulder, are doing the majority of the work over time, your shoulder's gonna be dead. And so I think that's where it ties in a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, to your question of a lot of times it's people come in and they just get assessed in the area of where there's pain. For me, it was a little different because I ended up having hip pain from my hip. But a lot of times with these rotational movements, they have elbow pain, but it's actually from their mid back that's not mobile enough, or their hip that's not mobile enough, or maybe it even starts at their ankle, and right off the bat they're losing all that energy. And so I'll start off by saying that, has anyone ever looked at these other segments? And they go, no, they just looked at the area of pain and treated that. So
Yeah, I think that goes back to general physical preparedness, probably. You might have someone who's an upper body athlete, a throwing athlete, and then you put them through that screening, oh, there's something going on with your hip. And I would imagine you also put that person through a movement assessment. They've got an immature squat, or they can't hit hip extension in the lunge. There's some type of functional deficit, which is probably when they're hitting similar positions dynamically, and then they're all of a sudden restricted, putting more pressure or requiring the joint that they're coming in for to do more work, or I guess absorb more of the force. I wonder though so we're talking about people who have, unless they're new to a sport, have presumably done this movement 10,000 plus times. So they have this habit, this ingrained movement pattern. And here you are coming in saying, well, we need to change this pattern. How hard is that? I mean, what is the commit? Because you can go in and you can assess it. They can acknowledge that it needs to change, and then you could come up with a plan. How hard is it to follow that plan, and how much time does it actually take for them to get them to change those movement patterns?
yeah, that's another great question. It is tricky at first. So a lot of times with rotational athletes, the biggest issue I see is, we call it hip shoulder disassociation, or hip shoulder separation. And basically what that means is, say this hand here is my hips, and this hand's my mid back or torso or shoulders. When you throw, hips should go first, then torso. And a lot of times you see it where they go together. And that's just because that's where you have to assess whether this is mobility or a mental thing. So I've had patients before where I see that with the sensors. That's why I like throwing in the sensors too, even if I see a restriction early on, because I see that on the sensors. It shows me they have zero separation in their body when I break it down slow. So then I go back to the movement screen and I look and I go, man, their hip mobility is good. Their mid back mobility, their thoracic spine mobility is really good as well. So, and then I go through the strength testing. Yeah, strength seems to be good too. So now I'm dealing with more of a mental thing, right? And they've just never been taught it up along the way, that this is actually specific to your movement and your sport. This is how you should move. So one drill, it's kind of funny. One drill that I really like doing right off the bat, if I see this, is I'll have an athlete lay right on their back in like the pencil position, like a pencil dive when you're young, and their hands are above their head in a straight line. And I'll say to them, all right, your upper body from your waist up is paralyzed. Your lower body from the waist down is not. I want you to roll over onto your stomach. You cannot move the upper body from the waist up. And some people, it's really interesting to watch, because the people that have trained this in their body, this separation, within a second or two, roll right over onto their stomach. The people that have never trained it, you can just watch their brain. They want to move this upper body. And I go, nope, don't do it. And then it takes maybe 30 to 60 seconds. They're just laying there, not moving at all, trying to fight their brain of, I just need to move my lower body, just need to move my lower body. And it's really funny to watch, because they physically can do it, but their brain's not allowing them to. So that's kind of the first drill. And then from there, we build on. Once they get that down, they train their brain. Yeah, I need to separate. Yeah, this needs to be more mobile. Then we build on from there. But that's usually the first one I do. And it's pretty funny, because sometimes people will just lay there and not move.
I see something similar with a hip hinge in the gym, or just in rehab in general, where like, well, I want you to keep your spine relatively stable. Don't bend your knees, and just bend at the waist, just at the hip. A lot of people just can't do it. They'll either bend the knees to get there, or they'll start flexing their mid back or something like that. And it honestly takes me putting my hands on them, and just putting my hand in the hip and be like, just crease here. And it's so weird because they have the mobility. You can assess it. The hips move fine, but they can't actively do it without incorporating other joints, which is just a funny thing when people they lack a basic movement pattern to do something, but they've been doing it for so long, and then maybe you can get them to the point in a controlled environment where they can do it, but then you put them out into sport or when they don't have a coach there and their heart rates are up and there's other things going around and all of a sudden it just reverts back like that. That's why I wonder with movement patterns. We see it with running a lot. I have a lot of people have pain with running. And I can just record them running and slow it down, and there's a million things you need to fix. But they've also taken 1 billion steps in their life and they run every day. So it's such a hard thing because I usually will just incorporate that technique stuff in warm up and hope that over time, over the years, we're going to get some kind of change out of it. But I would just imagine if someone's been playing golf for 20 years and they've never really had a coach or anyone look at it, and they play a lot and they go to the driving range a lot, and their swing just, you're looking at it, you're like, man, there's so many things we need to fix. And then you scan them and you see, yeah, there's everything that we need to work on. How hard for that type of person, is it just about looking at the big ticket item, like what's the biggest problem they have, and then almost separating that problem and to your, like, talking about like little drills like that away from the golf club. Let's just get those joints moving without needing other joints or in sequence with other joints, just trying little tricks and tips and then having that translate then when they pick up the golf club. Is that kind of more of how it works?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. So for me, I was dealing more with I was just talking a little bit more about like the college athlete that's fully committed to that sport. But for your case there, yeah, great point. If I usually start one, if they have pain, I'm going to address what's like you said, the main issue of what I think is causing that pain. Let's just fix that first. Whether it's, improve joint mobility, muscle activation when you get them in the gym a little bit. That's number one. That's where I also really like partnering with swing coaches to where I can say, I go to the swing coach with all my results and I say, their swing right now is causing them pain. They play twice a month. They love golf. Every time they go out and play, it's causing them pain. Do you have any tips, one for me I can give them? Or can we work together on this to figure out just little tweaks? I'm not trying to change a lot with someone like that, where if I say improve their hip mobility as much as I can, or get them partnered, and that's another reason why I like partnering with gyms a lot as well, and saying if you can get to this gym and get instruction on proper lifting form, whatever it may be, then we can improve just the big picture of what's causing the pain. Now, if you get back into like specifics, they did this with Josh Allen, the quarterback for the Bills. And he said, once you get that feeling, because when he first came into the NFL, his mechanics, he said, were just all over the place. And he had a cannon of an arm, but by like week 4, he had shoulder pain. And so they went through this whole assessment with him. And he said, once you get that feeling, once you get that idea, you go through little tune-ups as you keep going, but it's just repetition over and over. So again, each person's commitment level is different. I'll get as specific as I can with college athletes, even high school athletes that are, maybe playing 4 different sports or whatever it may be. And then I'll broaden it more for, the 45-year-old golfer that has golfer's elbow or low back pain. How can I get it so that they can just play 18 holes on the weekends with their friends with no pain and enjoy golf, versus how can I get the college golfer to play 6 times a week while having optimal strength, optimal mobility, and just repetition of what I find and what he needs to fix. So yeah, to your point, it's different for everyone. And that's where like the health history, figuring out the patient, what's their goal, right? Like what's their overall goal? And I tell them, you know, if you're 45 years old and your ultimate goal is you're a 6 handicap and you want to be a 0, it's going to be a grind. Like we're going to have to work a lot. Um, Not necessarily me and the patient, but I'm going to identify what's wrong. I'm going to help them. I'm going to give them certain mobility exercises, but it's up to them to do them at home as well. And then they come back in. If I see improvement, I give them the next stage. They go home. If they don't want to do that, then yeah, you can break it down into a more of a big picture thing so that they can just play with their friends on the weekends.
You ever run into a scenario where there's something glaringly obvious that needs to change and you change it and it makes them worse?
Yeah, I have actually. And that's a tough feeling as a health practitioner because you're so confident at first that this is the issue. And it can be one of two things, right? Like we were talking about their body over the course of their life has adapted to the one way that they're moving, and it's caused them some pain. But now when you make a change, their body's like, oh, hold up. Like I've never felt this before, or I've never done this before. And there could be an initial shock to that where it's not necessarily pain, but maybe that it just feels more stiff or whatever it could be. But if it's worse, like you just said, then it's just back to the drawing board and figuring out, okay, did I miss something? Do we need to go through this screening again? Did I miss something with the 3D system? Are they overcompensating now? Maybe I gave them something and now they're overcompensating what I told them to do.
Yeah.
You see that sometimes with golf, like if you improve their mobility, now all of a sudden they're really badly overswinging, right? And we call it like the John Daly swing. If you ever see John Daly swing a golf club, he swings back and I swear he can see the head of his driver down on the other side when he's in his backswing compared to someone like Tiger Woods, right? He swings and the driver stops at the top. John Daly swings it way over. So now you need to go back and see, once I gave them what they need to fix, is it something that they're doing new, or is it something that I did? And I think that's important for health practitioners. One, to say maybe the change I made isn't the best for you. We got to go back to the drawing board, or maybe you overcompensated what I gave you. But if you don't own up to that, then the patient will never get better. And our ultimate goal is for the patient to feel better. So
Yeah, I think there's an interesting debate within sports medicine of do sports cause injuries, or do sports select for individuals who are more prone to injuries because it's actually advantageous? And I think swimming is a good example. Everyone's got shoulder problems and everyone's got really mobile shoulders. So if you were to look at them and you're like, oh, you have excessive shoulder mobility, we should fix that, you'll make them a slower swimmer. So, and then there's a question, did swimming ruin their shoulders, or did they make it to an elite level of swimming because they have they're incredibly mobile? So so that the very thing that is quite possibly causing the pain is also making them an elite swimmer. So if you change that, what happens? And I think a really good specific example I got from someone who was working with a high level sprinter who he had been to one or two Olympics, and he was going into what would be his last shot, just age wise. And he was having some joint pain. And they had someone come in and assess him, and it wasn't TPI. I don't think it was some other assessment, maybe just visual. And then they noticed that he was a 400-meter runner. His right leg pronated out, so his foot turned out. And it was noticeable. Apparently, you could see it. And they said, well, that's not normal. We got to change that. And it actually increased his pain and made him slower. So the healthcare team had to step back and stop doing that. And they figured out a workaround, but they changed the most obvious thing, and it did not have the effect that they wanted. Slower and more pain, double whammy, bad. But then they came up with this hypothesis that, I don't know if it's true, but for a 400-meter runner, half of your race is in the curve, and his right leg turned out, and you turn left. So they were wondering if, like, yeah, it might not be efficient for the straightaway with having a foot turned out, but it may be incredibly efficient for the curve, which is half the race. So they were thinking of traditional sprint, run fast in a straight line. How can we make that faster? But they didn't embrace the possibility that he may be dominating at a world level because of the curve, not the straightaway. And I don't know how they did the workaround, but I remember hearing that story and thinking, okay, sometimes the most obvious stuff isn't necessarily something you're going to change. And I've run into it with swimmers before, where it's like you're an elite, you're competing at an elite level. Do you really want me to change your shoulder mobility? Are you willing to put in the amount of time? And what's it going to do? So we have to find some type of workaround. Almost have to embrace your dysfunction, because your dysfunction might actually be making you an elite athlete. So how do we work around that? And I wonder, with TPI, so you come in and you run into that scenario where it didn't you did the most obvious thing, and it made them worse. Does it just give you then other options? Okay, so we have to embrace this tension, or we have to embrace this lack of mobility or this hypermobility, and then move on to plan B or C. Is that how this system works, where you just, if you fail the first time, it's not necessarily your fault. It's just you're going systematically going through, because if something gets worse, it's not necessarily, if you keep going and you say, and you have enough humility to say, we tried and it didn't work. Let's shift the plan. Is that, does the system allow you that level of flexibility?
Yeah. Yep. And I think it comes into play with, you can either rescreen or go back to your original screening. And that can either be on my end, where the most obvious solution that I saw isn't the most obvious solution for them, but there's a B and a C and a D within that screening. And so, yeah, to your point, I would go, okay, well, if this didn't help you, let's go to B and C and address it from there and see if that helps. If that doesn't, then yeah, to your point, like, I like using Tiger Woods as an example when he was so dominant, right? Like, he was one of the first golfers to really build a lot of strength, really, really, really strong. Did he need more mobility? Maybe. I don't know the ins and outs of what he had. He's had numerous spinal fusions, but are you going to step in and say, hey, you just won 4 majors in a row. We need to improve your mobility? No.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a video recently that was going around of LeBron James doing a deadlift with a snatch grip, and it didn't look great. And a lot of people were talking trash, but then a lot of people were coming out and being like, he seems to be doing all right in sport.
Right.
And
Yep.
how tall is he? His femurs are incredibly long. It's not going to look like an Olympian who trains on that sport. Also, his sport doesn't, it's just, he's trying to get something out of the exercise, not trying to be good at the exercise. And I think that that's kind of funny. Sometimes you'll look at an elite athlete and you can sit there and pick it apart and be like, they're not doing that well. And it's like, yeah, he's the best in the world at his sport though. So is it really that important?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up LeBron. I think it was, don't quote me on this, but I think it was when they were going over functional movement screens, FMS. I think when he was in his rookie year or maybe his second year, they put him through an FMS screen and he failed it. Really bad, I guess. I don't know the full details of it, but this was a story that I had heard. And yeah, so then you go through that screening and you look at him and go, you're the number 1 high school player in the world, you're straight in the NBA, you're already an all-star, you're gonna make he's gonna win multiple championships. What do you change, right? Do you just do little things. I don't know what they ended up doing as a result, but do you just do little things that can just help him improve along the way? Or do you just say, yeah, like, I don't think we want to mess with you. Like, you're a beast. And that's the tough situation to be in. But yeah, I remember, I'm pretty sure it was the FMS screen they put him through, and it did not go well.
I don't know if you remember when Michael Phelps was swimming and he was the one who made cupping a thing because he showed up to one Olympics just with all the red marks, and all of a sudden it became this craze. And I think a lot of people want to get cupping done, and I remember, so cupping is traditionally from traditional Chinese medicine. People who practice acupuncture use it, and I've observed doctors of acupuncture doing it. Like they use fire to suck the air out, and it's hard to explain acupuncture because it doesn't go off of biomechanical. They go off of energy systems that are translated from a different language, and so I can't really explain cupping in that context. But cupping the way we use it is, I think, debatable whether it does anything. Sometimes people think it feels good. Sometimes some people don't find benefit. So it could be either or. And I always wondered with Michael Phelps, if he came to someone and he had some minor issue and they were sitting there smiling, oh yeah, we can help you. And in their mind, they were thinking, just don't make him worse. Just do not make him worse. If he doesn't get better, that's fine, but don't make him worse. And cupping to me always made me laugh because you've got a shot at it's not going to make him worse unless you create a blister. So don't do that. Other than that, if it doesn't have any physiological effect, if you can bank on the placebo effect, and which is high because you get the welts. And I always kind of laughed at that and wondered, was that the thought process of the provider? Were they sitting there with confidence in cupping, or were they just saying, I know it's not going to make it worse, and he hasn't done it before? And because how are you going to make Michael Phelps better? How are you going to make LeBron James legitimately better? So sometimes you'll get these athletes, and I've never worked with an athlete at that level, but I would think about it, just don't make them worse.
100%. Yeah. And looking at the other side of it, I remember learning through TPI, they did when Roy McIlroy first came into the PGA, they put him through a whole TPI assessment. And what they concluded was, because even at a young age, he was hitting bombs off the tee, and they concluded that his speed, he had so much rotational speed, it was off the charts, but his strength was really low at the time. So they said over time, your body is going to have so much speed that the muscles and the joints around won't be able to keep up, and it's going to lead to injury. So we have to build the strength. But again, to your point, it's risky because he was coming out of his young age, one of the best golfers in the world. People knew, similar to like LeBron, he was going to have a long, successful career. How much do you mess with it, right? Like, especially when you look at the other side, Tiger, super dominant, right? Built all that muscle, built all that strength, hit bombs off the tee, and he lost a lot of mobility. I think, I don't know Tiger's health history or anything like that, but in the end, he ended up having to get multiple fusions, right? Was it because he lifted so much? I don't know. Was it he didn't do enough mobility work? What there's so much if you're not talking with him, I don't know. But you get those two sides of it, right? And yeah, it's an interesting thing to touch with, because you're exactly right. Like, you don't want, especially when they're at their prime, the worst thing that could happen is they decline. So that's why I think when someone comes in with pain, it's a little bit easier to manage, because the first goal is to get them out of that pain, right? So let's try some things that can get you out of that pain. Let's find the root cause of that and address that. If they want just increased performance, it's more detailed, because you got to figure out what would help them in the long run, what wouldn't help them in the long run. And just communication is key with that.
Is TPI, is it a rigid system that you have to follow, or is it something that you can hybrid? Because I have practiced systems before that I have abandoned primarily because of the rigidity of it. And then if you only use a hybrid of it, it doesn't work. And I find that to be restricting. It's almost like the Bruce Lee model where, he was trying to be a master of different systems, but he never fought with one. He would pull from all of them to make up his own style. And I wonder, how is this something where, you go to one TPI person, it's going to be exactly the same as the other, like you guys are cookie cutter in a way, or is it just a set of tools that you can use at your discretion and kind of create some type of hybrid practice based on the principles? So is it more of like you're a black belt in karate, or are you like more of like a Bruce Lee where you've mastered it, but you use it when you need it and then pull in other things?
Yeah. And yeah, you can. It depends on the practitioner. So the base screening, if you just do like the bare base of it all, should be the same with each practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
just a standard screening. The more you work with golfers, or the more you work with whatever sport it may be, you can incorporate different things that you've learned into that screening, into that movement. I'm trying to think like, and I think that's where it comes. Again, back to what I really like about it is you're partnering with other professions as far as technique goes. So if I would take like Rory McIlroy, and then another prime example is John Rahm. He's he's on the Live Golf Tour right now, but before he joined Live, he was top 5 in the world. They went through a TPI screen with him, and his hip mobility was, I think it was his hip mobility was really restricted. But what they came to find out is that he was born with it, an anatomically short leg. I think it's his right leg. I think. Again, don't quote me on that, but I think his right leg's anatomically short. So instead of looking at it with Rory, right, where he had a ton of mobility, increased speed, or Brooks, what I was saying earlier, not as much rotation, let's build strength to make up for his lack of rotational speed. For Rahm, the biggest thing they did was fix his golf swing to where he doesn't have to load as much rotation into that shorter leg because it's off balance and it's restricted. So that's why when you look at John Rahm, he has a really short backswing, but then generates a ton of power just from that short backswing, which they customize that for him. So that's where it was a prime example of the TPI addressed it, but then they found, okay, hip mobility is restricted, but something else is off. I don't know what the behind the scenes were. And they found, okay, he has an anatomically short leg. TPI, that's not covered in the basic TPI screening. What else can we do to figure out how he can play long term without any issues with this, instead of just addressing it the same as what another practitioner would? And that's where they partnered with he's probably got one of the best swing coaches in the world, but that's where they partnered with a swing coach where they shortened his swing. Again, takes time. So that's where it depends on the athlete, right? To make him the golfer he is now. So yeah, I would say like the basic baseline screening would be the same with each TPI instructor, but depending on what level you are, depending on how much experience you have, from there you can pull in different ideas, different thoughts.
This seems largely biomechanical and technique based, and I can see with sport performance where that's just a huge component. When you're managing pain, biomechanics and technique and things like that it's a relatively small slice of the pie for a lot of people. So I wonder, do you ever feel like you get lost in the weeds? You're looking at biomechanics and missing, and then you realize, this person's clinically depressed, or they're going through a divorce or something like that, because a lot of those things that we don't treat can be such prominent factors in pain, especially chronic pain, where it's almost hard to separate them. So you can do all that you want with biomechanics, but that it, they never really, the root cause is not biomechanical, I guess. Is that something that you feel like is a strength or a weakness with TPI? do you get so bogged down that you can't see those things, or is it something that actually allows you to step back because of the technology, because you have a certain level of confidence with that you're going to catch anything biomechanical, and you can actually focus on the whole person and look what else is going on in their life?
Yeah. No, yeah, that's a great point. They just did an episode on TPI. I think it was with Joel Damon, where he became really popular on like the full swing is what it was called. It was on Netflix, I think. And they just did not quite to the extent of what you were just saying, but they just did something where they talked about it's really important to one ask how they prepare for whether it's a golf tournament or more detailed how they prepare for each swing. So I think for Joel, he said, I think it was in relation to his iron game and his putting, or maybe it was off. I can't remember if it was iron or driver, but they said, how do you prepare with each shot, right? When you putt, how do you putt? I think I'm going to have this right, but I'm not 100% positive, but you'll get the idea at the end here. And he said when he goes into his tee shots off the tee, he picks a target downrange, stands up, lines up, hits it. When he goes into his putting, he stands behind the ball, walks up to the hole, reads the break. They use different styles of reading breaks and stuff like that. And then he comes back, consults with his caddy, looks at the ball again, looks at the line, goes up, takes a couple practice swings, figures out kind of the distance, and then hits. And he said, okay, how much do you spend that amount of time on your tee shot? Joel's like, no, not at all. And so they said, okay, how do you think your mental side of that plays a factor into when you golf? Are you a better putter than you are a driver? And I think if it's not this way, it's the other way around. He doesn't spend as much time putting as he does off the tee. And so he said, yeah, I'm a better, if it was putting, I'm a better putter than I am a driver. And they said, okay, well, let's apply your same thought process into each shot off the tee that you would putting. And because I think after the screening and stuff, they didn't find a ton, right? So then they kind of went to the mental side of it. And that's the other thing with like young athletes transferring from, the top of the top to young athletes that you see a lot is young athletes get down on themselves so quick. Like one incomplete pass, pitch that goes past the catcher, or one golf shot that goes out of bounds. Like the mental side of it, and it's hard to train when they're younger, but getting into that high school, college age range, I think there's just so much pressure on them, or they put so much pressure on themselves. I shouldn't say that the other way around. They put so much pressure on themselves that one trick I like telling my athletes this is if you throw a bad pitch, if you hit a bad tee shot or something, I did this growing up, I would find one really specific thing after I did it, anywhere on the golf course, anywhere on the basketball court, whatever it may be. If I missed a field goal, like maybe if I miss a field goal, it was the very bottom left corner of the upright. And I would just really focus on that one point. And I don't know what it did, but it just kind of distracted my mind and calmed me down, where I would just really like focus on that for a couple seconds, take a couple deep breaths. I'd kind of go into my own world, and then I'd come to the sideline, get chewed out by my coach or whatever it was. But I think, to your point, that mental side, especially for the younger age, is really important. And I don't think it gets talked about enough at the pro level, how much mental training they go through, especially golfers. And even, I shouldn't even say just especially golfers, all sports. They're seeing sports psychologists all the time. They're working on their mental health a lot. And I think it translates to why they do so well. And we don't see that side of it. You turn on golf and you see every shot that you see is the best shot. If they showed more of the triple bogeys, people would be like, oh, yeah, okay. Like this makes more sense. But the young athletes, it's one thing I've really noticed as a common theme. I don't know if I don't go as much into, is it something from home or is it personal life thing, but they really get down on themselves quick. It's not necessarily they get down on themselves over a long period of time, but they mess something up and they're defeated.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I asked just because I think the more and more I've hung around with mental health professionals, the more I realize the benefit of asking questions and listening and things that may not have any effect, but how are you as a person? And I've had some, and the more I do it, the more I'm shocked because I could have someone come in with low back pain, and biomechanically I could find everything wrong with them. But I've had people where, I get them talking and they start spilling details, and I just kind of stop talking because I've opened Pandora's box. I'm not prepared to help, but they've sometimes just unloading is somewhat therapeutic. I've literally had pain go way down and biomechanics improve, and I haven't done anything. They come in and I can't touch my toes, my back's killing me. And they start talking about their divorce and different things like that, and for whatever reason they feel better and the back pain's less and the biomechanics have changed. And I think with athletes, a lot of times there's that, what you talked about, there's so much going on. Are they worried about letting their team down? Are they starting to identify as an injured athlete and they're worried about how people are going to see them? Is it scholarship related? Or are they thinking they're going to lose money? Is this their identity? This is all they've ever done, and now they're in their late teens, early 20s, and they can't compete. And all of a sudden they're sitting on the sideline when they've always been a starter. And so how much does that bleed into pain levels, biomechanics, and performance? Also, are they noceboing themselves, or have they been noceboed? Have they gone to someone and they've used some terminology or described it, explained it poorly, or not explained it enough? So they're in the dark and they're feeling like, this is worse than what I thought it was, because it changes everything. And then, because the difference, if you go image someone and you go, oh yeah, it looks like you have a degenerative joint disease and you got some bone spurs in there. Sounds pretty bad. But I could say also, even though that's accurate, maybe I could say, yeah, you've got probably a normal amount of joint space narrowing with some osteophytosis, which is pretty normal. Looks like the body's responding the way it would. Can't change it. Let's move on. Both of them are probably 100% accurate and viable descriptions, but they're going to have a very different outcome as far as their perception of their injury. And then that's going to affect pain levels, which is going to affect biomechanics. So I found that looking at both is really important. And sometimes stepping away from biomechanics and just opening up, like letting someone open up, has an effect on pain, which has an effect on biomechanics. And then sometimes I look like a genius because I haven't done anything and they're better, and it's like, well, not that you don't need the other things, but there's clearly more going on there. And I think you see it with athletes, especially if the recovery is poor. So there's nutrition, stress, sleep, training program. Does their sport training match up with their strength and conditioning? Which a lot of times that does not. Those coaches don't coordinate well. Or the sport coach does the strength and conditioning, which is almost never a good idea, because they can't separate. It ends up being too much of one thing. So there's these bigger patterns, and none of these have to do with the biomechanics. So I think that's my big hesitation towards gravitating towards systems, is that in the past I've lost focus on the big picture. I do have some certifications and some system-based things, but only because those systems work well if I take bits and pieces. The people who would run those systems would say that it doesn't, and that you're not supposed to do that, but I've found value in applying bits and pieces here and there to different people as needed. So I value system-based approaches because I feel like you learn a lot And as long as I can step out of them and take what I want and leave behind what I don't want. And I found that with a very specific form of chiropractic that I used to practice. I won't mention it here because I'm not here to talk trash about anything. But the words that were used were out of date. And I think most people who are up higher in the system would acknowledge that it's just hard to change a system, especially when you name the system after the founder and that founder is still alive. It's kind of hard to switch those things. But then people make decisions based off of what you tell them. And it was a very biomechanical approach, which worked fine, I guess. But I felt like missed a lot of things, and I didn't feel like I could actually implement pieces of it. It felt like all or nothing to me. So I abandoned that completely. But that's why I wonder with TPI, if you run into that wherever you're in a situation where you're following the path that's been presented to you that you're supposed to do, but you're thinking this athlete, maybe we can get back on the path, but we need to step away from TPI and step into something else. And it's not necessarily mental health, but it could be anything. You know, do you ever run into that situation, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think in relation to that, a huge factor that applies with that is how you are as a practitioner towards them. And what I mean by that is like how you and we have longer sessions. We get more one-on-one time with the patient. They come in and they say, I've done this and this and this, and I've gotten this advice. I've gotten this advice. And one just kind of taking a step back and just saying, okay, well, with me, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to help you resolve this. I'm going to spend this amount of time with you. We're going to go one-on-one. And I think a lot of it can relate to the personality of the practitioner, where I think a lot of times nowadays you run into, someone may be dealing with all that you're talking about, low back pain, whatever it may be. You go to an office, you wait in the waiting room for X amount of time. You go back, see the specialist or see whoever it is for 10 minutes, and then you're out the door. Where sometimes you're exactly right. And I've ran into this too. And it's been a result more of just spending more time with them than anything else, where the patient realizes, hey, this guy cares a lot. He wants me to get better. And I'm not saying that other practitioners don't. It's just
You can say it. They don't. I mean, it is a problem. I don't think, and I'll say it. I don't think we have to be shy about that. And I don't think it's necessarily their fault.
Right, that's what I meant.
You build a practice around insurance. You can't spend much time with people. You'll lose money. So I think some people are well-meaning. They just can't. So as a patient, you have to acknowledge that they can't spend time with you. And some people have been doing it so long. I've had people say like, what do you do for an hour with a person? Like, I can't even imagine how I would spend that time, because they've been trapped in that system for so long. And I feel bad for them because they couldn't, even if we freed them from that system, they'd almost have to learn a new skill. So if I'm hearing you correctly, then so it's like TPI builds the time. You're going to do this detailed biomechanical technique assessment, but because you have so much time with that athlete or that individual, inevitably, just being a human, you're going to connect with them and you're going to start to figure out other things. And it becomes maybe glaringly obvious if someone is going through something outside of sport that's affecting. So you find a way to make that connection just because you've built in the time and you're trying to find the answers. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah. Yeah. And connected to that, it's practitioner based.
Yeah.
So yeah, the TPI 100% builds out the time to where if I go through my whole session automatically, how TPI wants it, movement screen, power screen, sensors, it can take, just depending on the golfer, it can take up to an hour and a half for that initial session, where there's other screenings, other things where you can get it done in 10 minutes and be in and out the door. And yeah, if you're a practitioner where someone comes in, if it's say it's TPI related, and you're just, you know, on your iPad going through the screen, okay, yep, good. This is what I see with you. This is what you got to work on. Here we go. Let's go. Okay, I'll see you Tuesday. Or do you come in and say, you know, what you're dealing with is really unique. It's specific to your sport. Every time you golf, you have pain. I'm going to work with you for an hour to an hour and a half today. I'm going to assess your entire body. I'm going to puzzle it all together, break it down specifically for you. I'm going to come up with a treatment plan exactly for you, and not Matt has the same treatment plan, John has the same treatment plan, Jack has the same treatment plan. It's going to be custom specifically towards you, because the number one goal is for you to come in, you get better X number of visits, and you're off doing what you love again. I don't want to have you come in for 6 months twice a week. That's not fun for you, and I wouldn't be doing my job correctly if that's the case. So I think a lot of that is just how the practitioner is based. You can take it to where you say, yeah, this is a red mark, green mark. Okay, we need to work on this with you. Great, see ya. Or you can actually care about the person that's coming in, treating them as a whole, which I'm not saying they don't, again, I'm not saying other people don't care, but it's just their hands are tied. You're exactly right. And so, yeah, I think it's, to your point, it just varies based off the practitioner.
Then do you get the feeling that even within TPI, there are a population of practitioners who just go off the numbers, red, green, move this more, they're not connecting. They're spending the time, but they're not thinking. They're only thinking about the data in front of them and not thinking about the person. Is that a possibility within the system? Because some people might be saying, okay, well, TPI might be something for me, but is every TPI practitioner the same? Because you might be describing something that they sound is really good, but they don't live near you. So now they're getting on right now and they're Googling TPI and they're finding a practitioner in their area, but that person might only look at the numbers. And so they might go in and be disappointed because they're not getting the whole person aspect. So TPI is just the numbers, but what you're saying is that you as a practitioner could step out of that and provide more in the time that you have and not solely focus on numbers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think within TPI, because there's so much information, like they have there's a TPI fitness, TPI junior golf, TPI power, TPI medical. There's so much information out there that more with TPI, it's experience and how much you know. If you just take the base TPI level 1 intro course, you are tied to what they teach you in that, and it's not as detailed as what the later on courses are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could see that being the case, and I guess it just depends on how, like, let me give it an example. Like, I know someone that went to a TPI instructor, and it was the first time that they were going to, I learned this a couple years ago. It was the first time they were going to a TPI instructor, and they had all the technology, all the gadgets and stuff. And basically at the end of it, they said, yeah, like, your swing's really not great. We got to work on a lot. There's a lot of issues going on here. I can help you, but your swing isn't great. No patient's going to want to, no matter what their style is, no matter what their swing is, you don't want to hear that, right? And that's because they stuck to the numbers and they looked at the charting, and there was a lot of red and not a lot of green. And yeah, so that was the message that the patient received. Where for me, what I personally like doing is I like taking maybe the top 2 of the red and the top 2 of the green. And like you said earlier, like having a nice balance of, I think it was something with x-rays that you had said, where you have this, but hey, you also have this. So yeah, you know what? Like that low back pain, your right hip is pretty restricted here, but you know what you have a ton of? You have a ton of speed. Like you have a lot of speed with even with that restriction, you generate a lot of speed. So there's just ways to present the TPI screen where I've never seen it where someone is just red across the board or you'll find positives. Like I was working with a college baseball team, and same thing with on base U. If I take like a middle school pitcher, I'll find a lot more red than if I take a senior in college pitcher. There's still things within the screening that you can work on. Same thing with the youth, but you'll still find good things. So it's solely based on, or not solely, but it's a lot of the time it's based on how you present it. Do you present just all the negatives and throw that on the plate and say, here you go? Or do you say, these two things are something that I think we should start with, but you do these two things really well. I'm not going to touch that because you knock that out of the park. So I think it's more within TPI how it's presented versus everyone should be able to interpret it, all the TPI professionals, but it's what they pick to tell the patient.
Presumably you pick TPI over other options because in your mind TPI is better. Is that
yeah
accurate? And has it been compared to other things? So for example, have they taken FMS you used with golfers, let's say, like a specific population, and said, look, we took a population and we measured drive distance, or we measured handicap, and then that we put these guys through FMS. We had this crew just stay the same, and we had this crew do TPI, and then TPI outperformed. Is there stuff like that out there that drew you to this over other systems?
Yeah. So for TPI, they've just really specialized it, and this is the benefit of having the Titleist Performance Institute analyze all these pro golfers. Their studies are, I believe, Greg Rose, who's in charge of Titleist Performance Institute. He's either heavily involved or started SFMA. Don't quote me on that. But so he's had both sides of it. He may be involved with starting it as well. And so that's what was huge with TPI is they decided to go public with all the information that they've received. And he has that SFMA background, and through all of his research, he has said specific towards golfers, TPI is the best in order to help them because the movements you go through are specific towards the golf swing. SFMA is probably better for someone that's in like CrossFit, right? Because it's a little bit more broad than TPI, but covers more of like your daily movements of how you do things. So yeah, that's the one benefit with TPI is the founder of it has had backgrounds on both sides, and thankfully enough, Titleist pushed out all the information, and they could have easily, when they started, said, no, like we're just going to keep this to ourselves. And all these pro golfers, you need to sign with us because we have this at our capacity. And yeah, but no, they didn't. They opened it up to everyone else.
If someone's looking at increasing their drive, is there a percentage range that working with TPI? It's like, yeah, statistically, if you go through the program, you're gonna increase your drive by a certain amount.
So with that, getting into like the power side of golf, one thing that's really huge, well, two things. One is understanding the patient's background. So one of the first things I say with golfers and all sports is, what did you do growing up? They've done some studies and they talk about this in my TPI power course. They've done studies where they've taken, I think, like mid-20s, and if they had a background of, when they were 5, they played soccer and basketball and all these other sports, And then when they were 10, 12, they did more of that. And then when they got into high school, they started doing some weight training and then some powerlifting or whatever, Olympic style lifting. They've shown that by the time you reach low 20s to mid 20s, across the board, your swings, the natural speed you have in a swing or in a throw will be greater than someone that didn't do that. So I think the one study was, they say if you have someone that's between the ages of, this is for males, if you have a male between the ages of 5 and 8, that's a good time to start simple speed training stuff. And I don't mean just isolated, like go run 15, 10-yard sprints to a 5-year-old, because you're not going to do that. But getting them involved in soccer, getting them involved in, baseball, because you have to run to first, or baseball, swinging a bat, right? Throwing, things like that. Stage 1 of speed training is important at that age because you're growing. There a lot of growth happens between 4 to 8, 5 to 8. Stage 2 of speed training starts like 11 to 13, around the puberty stage for early teens, because you're, again, huge growth spurts. For women, I think it's age 10 to 12. For guys, it's 11 to 13. And that's where, games get longer, practices get longer. You're doing more running, cutting, a little more detailed with your drills, getting into middle school. And then as you progress past that stage, the growing slows down. So then what do you do next? You start building strength. So you've got the speed from when you're young. Your muscle fibers have adapted to that speed. Then you get into strength. And then as you reach into early college, late high school, you can start building into that Olympic style lifting, snatches, hang cleans, stuff like that, to where you combine both speed and strength. So they assessed that if you reach age 23, right, and you're a strong guy, but you never really did that speed stuff growing up, maybe, I don't know, maybe you just didn't do sports growing up, right? It's going to be really hard to teach speed. Really, really hard. Oftentimes they find more injuries teaching speed than you do without teaching it. Now they've got the strength, so that's good. So I guess for people to understand it at home, the easy way to explain it is, if you start with speed training when you're young, 5 to 8, we call that you've built jet fuel, or a rocket fuel. The best type of fuel, fastest rocket, you'll have the most speed. If you don't do any of that until you're 10, 11, then you are categorized into the jet fuel. So a little slower than rocket fuel, but still fast because it's jet fuel. You started at that 10 to 11, 12 age with your speed training. If you don't do it then, early and at that stage, you get into like 15 years old, you start lifting weights, right? Like you get into high school, get the weight room, start lifting weights. They call it like regular gas. So there's a lot of fast cars out there that run on regular gas, right? But it's not jet fuel, it's not rocket fuel. And if you don't do any of that until you're in college, you go see your college roommate lifts a lot, you're like, yeah, I'll go lifting. Then you're in the diesel fuel range. So not a lot of fast cars ride on diesel, right? So what they say is, if, like, I've worked with some junior golfers, and the biggest thing for them is if they tee up a ball and you're at a range with 4 junior golfers, right? And the first 3 hit it 40 yards dead straight, and they're 7 years old. Like, yeah, hey, one straight, nice. And the last kid, he is just bare white knuckling 120-yard drives 40 yards to the right, way out of bounds. I'm going to look at that kid and I'm going to go, great shot. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Keep doing that. Because over time, breaking down the rocket fuel, jet fuel, I can teach accuracy. Well, not me specifically, but someone can teach him accuracy. If he reaches an age where he can't build that speed back, like the high school, early college age, he's lost that speed. He's got the accuracy, but it's going to be really hard to build that back. So that's where, again, really long answer to your story, or to your question there. the health history is huge. If someone comes in and they're 30 years old and they're like, hey, I want 20 yards more on my drive, and they're a strong guy, then I say, okay, how did you grow up? If they didn't do those things, then you really have to start looking at technique and equipment to generate as much power and speed as they can with their swing. Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah. They just don't have the raw material to access. It just
right?
doesn't exist.
Yep.
I wonder, have they ever compared? So, like, let's say you got a group of people who are doing TPI, working with that, and then you got a group of people who just have a golf coach and a strength and conditioning program. Which one have they? Has there been any type of comparison to that?
That's a good question. There could be. I don't know off the top of my head.
I would be
Um,
curious. I grew up in a generation of soccer players who didn't strength train. I ran sprints all the time, but then I got to college and I had a strength and conditioning coach, and he was a former football player and a football strength and conditioning coach. So he just looked at us and was like, "I'm just going to work on these guys like I would with really fast football players who have to run a lot." So we did a lot of power cleans, kettlebell swings, really working on power. That was our thing. Everything, he didn't do a whole, we set strength foundations, but I don't remember ever back squat or anything being a big deal. It was like we would do the strength stuff to access, to build, make us more robust, and then work on a lot of technique to access as much power as we could squeeze out of ourselves. And I remember just this huge change in sport performance because, to your point, I already had the raw material. I'd been running fast, but I was accessing power because I didn't have a strength component. I could move fast, but I had no force behind it, and it changed a lot. And it made my um, conditioning for sport easier in a way. I could spend a little bit more time in the weight room and I could run sprints less. And I was more robust, I felt. And I wonder, so let's say TPI had been around back then and they were assessing soccer players. If they had come and look at me or any of my other freshman class, they would have found all of these things like from a power standpoint that needed to change. And then I wonder if you had split us into two and one crew had gone the TPI route and the other one had just hung out with our football strength and conditioning coach, who would outperform, or would they be relatively equivalent because the football coach is just looking at them and looking at us and being like, well, there's clearly a strength deficit because you don't lift. I know you're fast, but I know you're weak simply because there's an absence of strength training. And then the TPI would look at it and say, well, yeah, and we measured it. And a football coach would probably say, I don't need to measure it. I know they're weak. You know what I mean? Because you're starting from ground zero. So I feel like a lot of not competitive athletes, so your weekend warrior types, they walk in and they don't strength train. I know they're weak. Do a push up, can't do it. Can't hit a squat, can't move quickly. Like measuring the degree of their lack of athleticism is almost sometimes becomes like kind of a waste of time because they're doing nothing and now we're going to have them do something. So I wonder, has TPI ever been compared? Because if you take people who aren't competitive athletes who don't have a foundation, has it been compared to just sticking them with a good strength and conditioning coach and a golf coach, or going the TPI route? And how do those match up? Is that something they've ever done, or is that something they've ever talked about doing? Do you know?
Um, Specifically to that, I don't know off the top of my head, but there is a study that I did learn with TPI that slightly overlaps with this. Um, and they broke down fast twitch to slow twitch muscle fibers. And so for all these sports, baseball, quarterbacks, volleyball, golf, tennis, whatever it may be, you need a high amount of fast twitch muscle fibers, right? Because those muscles more than if you're a power lifter or something, right? Um, and so I know that they did a study, and I learned this through TPI, where they took someone who was like basically a couch potato, right? And assessed their fast and slow twitch muscle fibers. And I think just off the I can't remember the exact percentage, but let's just call it 10%. They had 10% of their body contained fast twitch muscle fibers. Okay. And then they put them through, they went from being a couch potato to then they did about a month to a month and a half of just like a football lift, right? Standard squat, bench, stuff like that. And then they assessed the fast and slow twitch muscle fibers after that. And their fast twitch muscle fibers went, let's just say it was 10%. I can't remember quite off the top of my head if it was 10 or 20. But their fast twitch muscle fibers went from 10% to 3%. So it dropped dramatically because they were just doing standard like heavy lifts, right? Heavier lifts for them. And then they had him go back to being a couch potato. Just stopped lifting, back to normal. And this was the part of the study that was super interesting. Their muscle fibers went from 3% and it skyrocketed to 20. It doubled the original muscle fiber percentage. And they called that the rebound effect, which they thought was super interesting. They thought it would just go back to 10, right? Where they were from the beginning. So I think it would depend on one, if you go through TPI, and I know like with the fitness certification and power certification, you learn a lot of lifts that are standard lifts, but also incorporate your fast twitch muscle fibers. Because how they looked at it was, if we can do these lifts, but maybe for a golfer they squat, but it's lighter weight, and you got to work on an explosive squat. That will work more your fast twitch muscle fibers within your hamstrings than if you just load up the plate and do 6 normal squats. So that's where having the lifts be specific to that sport is really important. So I'd say it's the same with soccer, right? Because it's a fast twitch sport. If you have someone that comes out with no muscle, again, it's fine early on to build muscle, maybe in the off season. So backtrack here. That's where it's really important with seasons. If you're a fall soccer player, maybe January, yeah, let's build some strength on you. Let's go from you're at 25% fast twitch muscle fiber right now. Let's load up some weight. That's fine if you slow down right now. But then as we get into April, May, we got to pick back up your fast twitch workouts. And if it went from 10% to 2% to 20 by doing nothing, I wonder what it could go from 10% to 2% with building strength. And then instead of going back to being a couch potato, you just do fast twitch lifts. Would it triple? Would it quadruple? Would that help you long term? So I think the lift should be specific to where they are in their season of their sport.
Yeah, I don't think ours, if thinking back about it, and I still have all my notes from it, is I don't think that there was ever a shift away from power. It was just an acknowledgement that we didn't have the baseline strength to move a barbell quickly. So can we build enough strength within a couple weeks to be explosive under a bar? And it was, yeah, pretty fast. And then it was all power. The intensity at which we would train would change based on the season, but we were always doing power cleans. You know, that was his, I guess, his lift of choice. Again, kind of an old school mentality. Although your first year, you didn't lift with the team because you didn't have the skill. So there's a huge emphasis for a full year to develop enough skill to be able to power clean heavy. So I think he had a very well-rounded vision of what strength and conditioning could be, because there was a huge emphasis on, well, we have to kind of fill in some gaps here before we just let you start going with it. But that emphasis on the technique of it allowed us to access more power. And I think the power is interesting because, you know, you can scale back load a lot. I think I've read you can go like you can take a 1 rep max down to 20% and still develop power because you can move faster. So it's just a mathematical equation at that point. And as you start wanting to get heavier, if he starts going slower, and that's the nice thing about something like a power clean, if it's slow, you're going to miss it. So it becomes at some point pass or fail. So it's like we don't need to measure it. You either did the lift or you didn't. And if you got under the bar, you know, depending on what you want to get out of it, you could say like, well, it's fast enough apparently. But I think it's interesting because I've had these questions with other systems and other things outside of TPI, where it's like, how specific do we need to be with someone who has no foundation? And a lot of times I would want to know, do we need to be very specific? You know, if you've got someone who, you know, you look at them and it's like, well, you're weak and you're slow and you're carrying too much body fat and you're stiff and you're tight. And I'm talking about like the average person I see on the golf course. You just watch them. You go out to the golf course here and everything needs work. So any improvement would probably produce some type of improvement in performance to a certain extent. And that's why I'd be curious to see if they ever took TPI and would say, okay, we're going to go strict TPI and we're going to match it up just to a really good quality strength and conditioning program without TPI, with someone who's actually looking at sport specific movement. So they're looking at power and rotation. They're looking at mobility, you know, but they're not using technology to assess it. They're just kind of doing standard stuff that you would do clinically or in the gym to see, is it equivalent? Does one outperform? Because I think that would be really strong for TPI if they're like, yeah, we still outperform. It is still better. And I get it with like a pro golfer for sure, because like with Michael Phelps and LeBron, like what are you really going to change? You're going to have to get down to the details to make a difference in those athletes. But with your average weekend warrior who's not training, I mean, I had someone the other day was complaining about pain with pickleball, and I was like, well, what does your warm up look like? And he said, oh, I don't have one. I was like, okay. I did an assessment, but I was like, until you start warming up and cooling down, there's no treatment. I have nothing for you. I'm going to follow up with you in 1 week. And I called him and he was like, the pain's down 75%. I was like, yeah, because you were missing something that was foundational. And I'm sure when I looked at his movement stuff, I could go back and be like, yeah, he lacked range of motion here. There's a biomechanical thing here, but he wasn't doing something foundational. And for golf, I just picture sometimes I'm picturing sometimes when you're talking, it's like we're doing this like space-aged movement analysis, and then you see them on the golf course and they're 6 beers deep, you know. And it's like, well, what happened to the hip mobility? We're working on the drill where you're rolling on the floor and you're only moving one part of your body but not the other, you know. And the guy's too drunk to drive. So I don't know. But I think you've probably answered that already. It's so individual with the person. But I think that would be a cool thing if TPI felt really strongly about what they were doing, to lay it down like that and actually compare it. Because if it did outperform it, I mean, then you've really that's strong. And I think that's my problem if we can just go to chiropractic in general. And I know TPI is not chiropractic specific. You know, I think traditionally chiropractic will make a bunch of bold claims, but we've never really actually tested them. In 130 something years, we've never put our money where our mouth is and compared it objectively. And a lot of times when you ask about that with people who are like, I want to say hardcore traditional chiropractors, they're like, what more proof do you need? We've been doing it for 130 years. It's like, okay, well, compare it to a fake treatment, you know, compare it to anything else objectively with a large enough sample size, and let's see what happens. And I think there's almost a rejection of that in a way. And I have a particular problem, not a problem. I'm particularly skeptical with pediatric chiropractors. I'm not here to talk trash about them, but there's a lot of things that just seem weird about it to me. And I was at one of our state conventions one time, and I got on a bunch of email lists, and there's some chiropractic group, and they had sent out newsletters, and they said, hey, we got a call, you know, a 1 hour call with some bigwig in pediatric pediatrics. And it's the science and the art, I think, was the title of pediatric chiropractic. And I was like, oh, the science. I'm game. I'm going to get on this call. And essentially the science in that was they rejected science and they rejected randomized controlled trials and they rejected meta-analyses because there's no way that you could capture what they did with science. And I'm probably not summarizing it exactly, but that was the gist of it. And I was like, is that true? Or do you just know that it's not going to work out and prove your narrative? Or is it might actually disprove your narrative? So I think that would be a cool thing if TPI is like really, really thinks it's a better system and better than traditional strength and conditioning and better than traditional coaching, or it has something to add that's going to amplify both of those, because that's kind of what it sounds like. It almost augments both of those. So the presence of TPI would be superior compared to the absence of TPI in different populations. And then which populations would it be? Is it something that's actually better for your couch potato weekend warrior who's going to crush a 6-pack on the golf course every weekend? I think it'd be an interesting thing. Is it population specific where you get more out of it? Because clearly pro golfers like it. But to your point, I'm not going to train like a pro golfer. I'm not going to put that kind of time into it. So you could tell me all day that I need to increase rotation by a certain number of degrees and I've got to dedicate this amount of time. And it's like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So what do you have for me? And then do you just fall back on traditional strength and conditioning at that point, or something sports specific? Do you ever run into that situation where it's like, it's very clear what they need to do, but that they're not going to do it, but they still need help? And then do you just have to like revert back to something other than TPI, or does TPI kind of address that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's for me personally, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Aside from all other TPI professionals, I'm not sure. I think TPI, if you would ask them as well, they would agree with that. That if you just have, your weekend golfer come in, and obviously they should start getting to weight training and strength and conditioning and doing some running and stuff like that. I think they would agree that, yeah, they don't necessarily need to do the specifics of TPI. And this is where I personally do this. I can't speak for everyone else, but if that's the case, then I'll incorporate maybe 75% standard strength training and then 20% of slightly more golf specific workouts. So whether it's just working on, your rotation with a workout, band work, stuff like that, I'll do just 80% what you're saying. Yeah, let's just do the basics here. I'll go through the whole test and everything, and then I'll assess them as far as this is kind of why I like TPI, what you think is best just for that specific patient. I'll still throw in some golf movement exercises, because as far as golf goes, like there's a lot of muscles that you use within a golf swing that you don't normally use just with daily life, right? Right. Yeah, absolutely. So to train those muscles as well, if they come in and say, yeah, I have tennis elbow or golfer's elbow or whatever, um, I'll go that route. But to your point, it's more with that population of golfers. Let's start with these basics first. Let's perfect these, and then stage 2 is let's get a little more specific if you're willing to commit to that, or if you like where we're at right now, we can just build off of the basics as well.
I think that's an important thing then for you, or for people to know about you then, because there are a lot of people out there who would probably look at this and be like, I'm so bad that everything is going to be red. I don't need someone to come in here and measure how terrible everything is. I know I'm weak. I know I have no rotation. I got it. Why would I even spend the time or the money it almost seems too advanced. And I think a lot of my patients would look at it that way. And so I think it's important, if someone's going to come see you, that they realize that, hey, if it is too advanced, I'm going to tell you. we'll still work on some sports specific things, but there's some foundational stuff that's just, you know, you got to be able to bend over and pick up the golf club multiple times. Just a standard deadlift, might be where you start, and then adding in the rotational stuff and things like that. Because I feel like in the sports realm, there's some really marketable things, and the term sports specific is getting to the point where it's driving me nuts, because it would be like, we're going to do all this sports specific, scientific, all of this stuff, and that the person can't squat. They can't get on and off the toilet without knee pain. And like, well, who cares about this other thing? They don't have the foundational, the basic foundations to do basic things over and over again. Why would we get sports specific if their general physical preparedness is trash? And then I see it with like collegiate athletes where that's happened. They haven't done a loaded squat of any kind of capacity for like 6 years, and now they're a senior and they're dealing with knee pain. But they haven't squatted because putting a barbell on their back or holding a barbell or holding a dumbbell, anything like that, causes knee pain. So they've almost been let down for like 6 years for the bulk of their athletic career, and through some very key developmental things, because people were too sports specific. They were looking at like, well, the biomechanics and the range of motion. And it's like, well, they got to be able to do a push-up. If they use their upper body, it's beneficial. I had a basketball player talk to me about it once, and he was like, I want to hire a taller vertical. And this guy was pretty tall. I was like, why? And he was like, well, I want to win the ball more off tip-offs or whatever. And I was like, so you think your vertical is why you're losing it? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, what if you can jump high enough? What if you're just too weak? Or what if you're slow? What if your technique's terrible? Your body position's bad. Like, how do you know all of that? Are you sure all of that's in line? And it's just, if you could add an inch, you would win more? And he was like, he paused, and I don't know. Well, those are good questions, because yeah, I can work with you and increase your vertical, but it doesn't mean you're going to win the ball more. Like it doesn't necessarily change sports performance. But if you looked at it, it's super sports specific for basketball to increase a vertical. But how high do you need to be able to jump? Especially if you want to dunk, you only need a certain amount of height, depending on how tall you are and how long your arms are. So what's the point of being able to jump higher than that? At some point, it just looks cool, and it falls into sports specific. But that's where I think maybe is an important distinction for you, that it doesn't seem like you go off of the numbers specifically, that you are looking at the basics. Is that?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. 100%. So like a standard visit for me is, like, say you're my patient and you come in and you say you have low back pain from golf. My first thing isn't boom, TPI, here we go. I continue taking the full history, and then I'll assess just through basic movements is what I start with. So like one that I like doing is, I'll start with like a squat is one. This is not the very first thing, but one of the things I'll do is just like an air squat. If they do an air squat well, then I'll do an overhead or hands overhead air squat. Then even just like a simple lunge. I put them through like basic movements first, right in my exam room. They'll sit on the table and I'll say, okay, first I'm gonna see how you move. Like, how do you move? If I just all of a sudden start going into mobility stuff, I don't know how their daily life movement is. And so yeah, I probably should have included this earlier, but yeah, this is how like a normal visit goes. And if they move well enough, then I'll slowly go into, okay, we can either do TPI route if they call ahead of time, or they're specifically seeing they want TPI care. Then I'll incorporate some of that into it. But if they just call and say like, yeah, I get low back pain from golf, that doesn't necessarily mean to me, yeah, I'm going to go straight into TPI care. Let's see how you move. Let's see if, whether it's soft tissue work, whether it's whatever it may be, strength training, what will help you the most for this initial visit. And then we can go from there into maybe they're feeling better, and by the third or fourth visit, I say, hey, like, now that you're feeling better, I don't want that pain to come back while you're golfing. Let's go through a TPI assessment and see if we can do some more preventative stuff now that you're moving more like you should. Yeah. So to answer your question, I think it's super important to balance those two, because if every golfer just received the one standard TPI assessment and care, that wouldn't, especially across all levels, that I don't think that would help them fully. No.
I think that's important, because just to look at other systems that I've been a part of, someone will walk in and be like, yep, I got low back pain because my right leg's always shorter than my left, or something like that. And it's like, maybe, probably not. Could be, or that's it. That's just the one thing that we have to change. And so I think a lot of times when you get bogged down in system-based approaches, you put these blinders on. You can't look right or left. You're just looking at what you're trained to look at, which is going to work for a certain population. Statistically, you're going to get it right. And then there's that selection bias, and I think that when you have systems or professions that reject research and they go off of history, oh, we've been doing this for 130 years and it's been working. You're only focusing on what worked. You're not focusing on what didn't work. And what's that percentage look like? A broken clock is definitely right twice a day. So is that just what you're talking about? 130 years of the clock being right twice a day? Yeah, it's a lot. But when you compare it to everything. And so I'm not saying that's TPI. I'm just saying, like, when people come to me and they've been through, whether it's a named system or they've been to a clinic that is very systematic. I know someone who went to a local PT clinic, and the way it was described to him is that he got the same plan for his injury as everybody else, because statistically, this is what gets more people better. And that frustrated him, because he was like, well, what if I don't fall within those statistics? What do you do for me then? And ultimately, he didn't ask that question because it was very confrontational, but that's why he didn't go back, because he was like, well, this doesn't really seem like personalized care to me, because you're blinded by your system. But it seems like, so regardless of TPI or strength and conditioning or whatever, you're just gravitating towards athletic people or people with athletic active lifestyles, as opposed to just pain management.
Yeah.
Is that what made you decide that's how you wanted to focus?
I think it really opened up to me based off of my injury as a kicker, because I felt like I was doing the strength training, I was doing all the work that was required, and when it could have been prevented, that just really opened my mind to where I think once someone reaches pain, the level of pain, they're at the finish line, but the 5K that led up to the pain was ignored, and then they crossed the finish line, and now the finish line resulted in the pain. What I love doing is catching them at the 1K mark and going, hey, if you continue the rest of this 4K, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a chance that something could come about. And I think it's better and then different levels of pain, right? Like if you come into my office and you have a strained muscle, that's different than tearing it off the bone, right? Or tearing it completely in half, or if you have like shin splints for runners, right? Like that could, if you continue doing that, it could lead to something worse. Even like muscle assessments where, one side may be stronger than the other, whatever it may be. There's a broad spectrum of it, but I like that, explaining to people, yeah, this time it was just a mild strain, but it's because this is happening in my mind. And if we can catch this early on enough, then down the road, this may turn into if you don't do anything, it may turn into a grade 2 sprain or a a tear or something. Um, and I think it's just a side of healthcare that I think is newer and growing a little bit, of more preventative care and not as much just fixing the cause of pain. And I think it translates back to, like, if you have shoulder soreness, or I look at it like, let me backtrack here. I looked at back, like, if Max Scherzer in the MLB is a really famous pitcher, how has he been able to pitch for 15 years? And from what I know, he's been out some, but he hasn't had like the Tommy John or something like that. But Nick, the senior in high school, 2 games in, can't even feel his arm, right? Like, that just doesn't add up to me. Or like the junior in college who is doing the strength training, is doing all that stuff. And again, this is more to like specific athletes, of college level athletes or high school athletes or whatever it may be. If you're a weekend golfer, I think, and whether you're out of shape or whatever, weak in some areas, that's where you get more into the basics of, yeah, if you continue to do this, then you're going to see some issues here. In my personal opinion, issues tend to arise with this, whatever it might be. You follow what I'm saying? But that's one scenario where I always like Nolan Ryan, for example, in baseball, pitched forever. How? Like, why was he able to pitch? And is it something anatomically that Nick, who's the junior in college, has? Is it something mechanically? Is it something that can be prevented? But how was Nolan Ryan able to pitch all those years and be okay? And Nick makes it 3 games in, and he's like, "Yeah, coach, my shoulder's done." And that's where I don't have the answer right off the bat, right? Like, I have to break it all down. And that's where I like, with what you and I do, I like using the puzzle reference. I can puzzle the things that I know. So whether it's exercises, basic strength training, squat, bench, split squat, lunges, whatever it may be, TPI, on base U, biomechanics, chiropractic, I can puzzle all the stuff that we know and say, I think if I combine these and these and put them together, this will be the best set of care. Or if I combine basic strength training and basic mobility work, put those together, that'll be the best care for you. So I like having a broad spectrum, right? Because I think it gives the patient the best care in the long run.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Sorry.
No, it does. I think what you're describing is just being humble and then being prepared to be flexible, and a lack of rigidity built into a system. At the workshop that I did on Saturday, I had someone talking to me after, and as people do, they ask very simple questions and the answer is incredibly complex. And I said something to the effect of, I don't know. I honestly don't know. And she I didn't say she looked at me surprised, but she kind of paused, and I said, do you want me to just tell you something with some confidence?
Right.
Because I could.
Yeah.
I can just label it and tell you I can fix you, get you on the schedule. But I said, I honestly, with what you're describing, it could be a lot of different things. And I try to explain to her that a lot of times with my patients, I look at it as we may need to fail a certain number of times before we figure this out. So let's fail systematically and as quickly as possible, because I'm just going to make a hypothesis and we're going to have some options. And then you're going to look at these options and you're going to tell me what's doable right now. And we'll try and do as much as we can. And then we're going to test that out, see what happens. Either you're going to get better, there's going to be no change, or you're going to get worse. We have basically 3 outcomes. They all tell us something. It's a green light. If we get better, we keep going. Yellow light if we're not getting better, but they're not getting worse. There's no change, because maybe we just need to tweak something, or maybe the dose is too low or too high, or we got to but we might actually be really close to a solution. And I actually love the red light. I mean, because I'm not the one in pain, but If we get it wrong and I make you worse, well, we go the opposite direction. It gives me like a ton of information. Well, let's not do that anymore. And then maybe we might change directions, and then we get it wrong again. Great. Cross that one off the list, because I think that's kind of sometimes it's a process of elimination, and people don't really want to hear that. That's actually harder to sell. It's a lot easier to just be super confident and just say something and then double down. And then if they don't get better, you can blame it on the patient. Be like, well, they weren't compliant. They didn't do everything I told them to do as much as I told them to do it. But I feel like that's almost how we're trained as healthcare providers to be. It's like, you just got to know the answer and you got to stick with it. You remember clinic in grad school. It's like, I don't know, maybe it was different for you guys, but it's, I spent some time with the patient, and I have to go report back to the actual licensed chiropractor I'm working under their license, and I had to have a diagnosis. In an hour, I had to figure it out, and I had to have the answer, and I had to have the plan. And I understand why they structure it that way, because there's a learning process to it. But I think a lot of people don't realize that that's not how it actually works. A lot of times you don't know after an hour. It takes a month. Sometimes it takes 6 months working with someone to kind of nail this down and figure it out. And I think we're in this academic environment that's high pressure. It's trying to weed out people, and it's trying to get you to be able to work under stress and be able to work quickly, and trying to teach you all these things. But they don't explicitly, or at least for us, they didn't explicitly explain that you might not want to practice this way. But to be fair, if you're going to bill insurance, you've got to have a diagnosis code. So you do have to, and that's the nice thing about, for me, not taking insurance, is I have a diagnosis section in my notes, but there's no codes to it. So a lot of times on day one, my diagnosis will be a paragraph of what I think I may have ruled out. There's a differential. I think it might be some of these things. I'll just write a note to myself. And then every time I see that person, I'll kind of refine that note. And if I would send that to an insurance company, they're like, well, what's the diagnosis? And it's like, this isn't an episode of ER. I got to figure this out in 30 minutes, especially for someone who's had chronic issues. Oh, you've had this for 20 years? I'm so arrogant. I'm just going to figure this out right now when no one else has been able to figure out. And let me slap the one alphanumeric code on there, and I'm going to fix you. Let me crack your back or do this special exercise or whatever. I'm going to fix it. It's like, when I explain it to a patient like that, they're like, yeah, I don't think I want that. And in that, once we've had that conversation, then it opens me up to saying, I don't know. Failing is okay. Let's just keep going. Let's just not make the same mistake twice. I'll promise you that. Like, we're not going to do that. So I feel like, from my limited understanding of TPI, as long as it allows you that flexibility to be wrong and to pivot, I'm okay with it. Where I'm shut down to a lot of systems because they don't allow that. The system can't be wrong, and you've got 3 options, And I think that's the frustrating thing. And it's hard to, sometimes when people are like, oh, I have pain, I live in this city, who should I go? Do you think I should go see a chiropractor? I'm like, I don't know. Well, do you think I should go to a physical therapist? Like, sorry, PTs, I've got as much. I'm not trying to talk trash about physical therapy, but I think a lot of physical therapists will agree that there's a lot of variability, and variability within a profession can be a strength, but can also be a weakness, because people can just go off the rails and just do stuff. And so I think that it's a hard thing where, if someone's like, well, my child has a viral infection, I think, should I take him to see a pediatrician? Yeah. Board certified pediatrician is probably going to hit a home run on that, regardless of their thoughts on anything. They're going to get that one right. And so same thing, if I've got crippling chest pain, do you think I should see a cardiologist? Probably going to do well with that. I just think within conservative musculoskeletal care and within sports performance, we don't have enough of a standard of care, and it's a strength and a weakness. And I see it in strength and conditioning. Try and find a good set of guidelines for introducing novices, brand new people day one, to strength and conditioning. It doesn't exist. And even if you look at, we run off the American College of Sports Medicine and a lot of what the NSCA says. If you look at the ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, their guidelines for novice strength training, one of the things in there that I can't follow is they give percentages. It's safe to train someone within this much percentage of a 1 rep max. If this is day one, how do I know what the 1 rep max is? You know what I mean? It's almost not functional. So someone wrote those guidelines that has never trained someone in a gym or has never rehabbed anyone, because I can't have a percentage of an imaginary number. You would have to give me some other system to analyze and be able to know what's the good entry point for this person. And if you look it up in strength and conditioning, it's just, there's so much variability, which again, strengths and weaknesses, but it's the same. I think it's very similar in rehab. It's very similar in any kind of conservative musculoskeletal care, because you as the patient, you have to make the determination. The path that you will go on for your pain journey or your sport performance journey 100% depends on your ability to make a decision based off of Google, on your interpretation of what you see on the internet. And that has a lot to do with who pays more to pop up on Google, or who paid more to have their website developed, or who has a better Instagram. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're better at what they do. It's going in the chip aisle and they put a specific brand of chips at eye level because that brand is probably paid to be there. And you're going to make that selection because they know you're going to make that selection. And I think that's the hard part about people deciding. So you've got people in Detroit right now with pain, and it's hurting their ability to play sports. And they're thinking about, who do I go see in the Detroit area? Who am I going to work with? And even if they narrow it down to TPI, to your point, who knows? Like, there's probably other TPI practitioners out there. Is someone going to run off the numbers, or is someone going to look at some basics? Is someone going to ask them actual questions and do an assessment that doesn't have to do with, just science and not science, but like technology? And should they pick a chiropractor or a PT because they might well do TPI? Or should they go to a strength and conditioning coach, or should they just go see a golf pro? Or you can extrapolate that out with any sport. So I think that these detailed conversations matter because there's almost too much variability. And I have a hard time recommending people if I don't know, based on their degree. Like, I don't know how they practice, and I don't know what they're going to tell you. And so it becomes challenging. And I think other than in long form conversations like this, you're not going to get this off of an Instagram clip. And I say that, and I'm going to be hypocritical, and I'm going to make Instagram clips out of this long form discussion. But I think it's important if people actually can get into some of these topics, because I can tell you that I know there are a lot of people who will never come on my podcast because they can't answer these questions in any type of depth, because the depth of their explanation is, that's how I was taught in school. That's what my mentor taught me. I don't know. That's the way I've always done it. Because I've had these conversations with other healthcare providers behind the scenes, and that's the depth. Someone is like, well, they've been in practice for 30 years. They must be great. So you're saying someone who's been driving a car for 30 years is a race car driver? It's not, they might just have spent 30 years ingraining bad habits that they learned 30 years ago and not changing. And I find that to be problematic, where people don't shift and change. And so, I think it's a positive thing that you're willing to come on a podcast and talk about it, because as you can see, I'm super skeptical about any system and anyone who practices a system blindly and strictly, because I've joined those cults before. And I've had to have a rude awakening where I step back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in a cult. I think how people tell me to think. And when a situation happens, I react in the way that I was trained to react. Why do I do that? Why do I have to do that? And there are certain instances, if you're going to be an EMT, yeah, you got seconds to make the right decision. So we don't do emergency medicine, unless you're going to be on the sideline. Then yes, if someone's having a heart attack, there's certain things you need to do. But for the most part, someone comes in with chronic low back pain from golf, it's probably not an emergency. So having that variability, I think, and that flexibility is important. Hey guys, if you're still listening to this episode, I had an issue with the uploading process and I lost the last 40 minutes. So this is actually a really long episode. It was a great conversation. Unfortunately, a bunch of Joe's audio got corrupted. So I took everything else out because it just sounded like I was talking to myself for the last 40 minutes and it didn't really flow that well. But if you're still listening to this, it means you're interested in the subject. I have got Joe's contact info linked in the description. You can reach out to him if you have any questions about TPI or chiropractic or sports therapy or performance or anything. Again, thank you for listening. I appreciate my listeners, and I hope you look forward to the next episode. All right. Talk to you guys later.